Prerequisites on stats. I think this is one of the more important ones because you're going to find that when we start calculating statistics and calculating odds and probability, we will be calculating them mostly using decimals, but most of the time we like to throw them as percents, or they give them to us percents, and vice versa. So we have to feel comfortable going back and forth between decimals, fractions, and percents. So what I'm going to have us do is, if you can flip it over, and on the back there's this nice open space right here, we are going to write the conversions, and I'll even write the conversions up here on the board so we can see them and we don't have to flip back and forth. But this is more for when you're working on your worksheet. So what we're going to do, if we want to go from a fraction to a decimal, what do we need to do? So let's say 4 out of 5 people recommend this toothpaste, right? What would we do with 4/5 to change it to a decimal? 4 over 5. That fraction bar is division. So you simply divide 4 by 5. So you just divide. That's your your operation. Then a lot of times we don't like to keep the decimals as is. We like to change them to percents. So say we do that in our calculator. We do 4 divided by 5 in our calculator and we get 0.8. But I want that as a percent. I want to know what percent of people like this toothpaste. What do you need to do to a decimal to make it a big percent? Okay, and exactly right. So he's doing this little movement, right? We're going to move the decimal point over 2 spots, but that's simply because we're multiplying by 100. And I'll write that though, Devin. Because I'm okay with that, if that's all you're doing. Because multiplying by 100, it means I'm going to make your place value 100 times more, aka your decimal needs to move 2 spots. So you just move decimal to the right 2 spots. All right? Sometimes, though, more likely than not, they're going to have something given to you as a percent, but you need it as a decimal in order to put it into your formula, so you need to go backwards. So how do we go from a percent to a decimal? You move it to the left, right? If we had to multiply by 100 to get to a percent, then we're going to divide by 100 or move to left, right? Decimal to left, 2 spots. And I don't care which one you're doing, whether you're just simply moving it or if you're multiplying or dividing by 100, you're going to have a calculator, so you can do either or. All right, and then the next one's kind of the hardest one to explain. So say you have 80% and you want to change it to a decimal. So you move it over 2 spots to the left or divide by 100 and you get 0.8. But then how do you go backwards? How do you go from 0.8 to that 4/5 that we want? So how do we go from a decimal to a fraction? Well, today, since some of you don't have a graphing calculator, you are going to have to do it the absolute hard way. So I will write it the hard way, but those that have your calculator, we have a nice button that changes any decimal to a fraction. You know you're a math teacher when you have a favorite button, and that is my favorite button on the calculator. Math Frac is my favorite button, okay? Let's write down what we'd have to do if we had just our cell phone or just a scientific calculator or whatever it may be. What you do is you put that number over the appropriate spot, the 10, the 100, or 1,000. So put over 10, 100, 1,000, etc. So what decimal were we dealing with? 0.8. It's in the 10th spot. So we put 8 over 10, but then we'd have to reduce. But what would 8 over 10 reduce to? 4/5. So that, and reduce. So I'm writing that just so you kind of keep in mind if like you're working on something, you're like, oh, I don't have my calculator with me. But what we're going to do, so I'm going to like star this part. You just hit math, and then number 1, which is fraction. It has like a little arrow that just means turn it to a fraction. Okay? So even though this is probably the hardest to do by hand, it's honestly one of the easier things to do if we have that graphing calculator. We'll be able to kind of fly through those problems. All right? So again, kind of keep this in mind as we're working on it. I'll write it over here since it's a little bit better lit up. So what are we going to do? Fraction to a decimal. We're going to just divide. I'm just keeping this in mind when we're working on the homework. And then decimal to a percent. We're going to multiply by 100. Percent to a decimal, we're going to divide by 100. And then decimal to a fraction, we're going to hit math frac. Because everybody, by hopefully next week, will have that calculator, or at least be able to rent it or whatever it may be. So let's go ahead and get started on these. On number 1, they want us to write number 1 and 2 as a fraction or mixed number in lowest terms. So this is what I was talking about. If you have a graphing calculator, guys, we're going to be able to go to the answer pretty quickly. If not, oh, look, I'm using 0.8, and I didn't even mean to. So if we were doing this by hand, okay, we would say the 8 is in the 10th spot, right? So we would do 8 over 10, and we would say, okay, what goes into both 8 and 10 evenly? 2, right? So we'll divide both by 2, and we get 4/5. Does 4/5 reduce anymore? No. So guess what our fraction equivalent is? 4/5. Not too bad when it's 1 digit and 8's divisible by 2, you know, all that stuff. But then we're going to get a little bit more complicated. Let me show you how we could do that on our calculator. And it's always kind of hard because it has a glare at first, okay? So in your calculator, what you're going to do is you're literally going to use 4 divided by 5, okay? So anytime we do fractions in our graphing calculator, it's just the division button. And then you hit math. See how fractions the very first thing highlighted? Enter, enter. Oh, why did I do 4 divided by 5? That's not what we care about. Huh, sorry. We're going to type 0.8 and then math frac. And it changes your, we knew 4/5 is 4/5. So we take our decimal 0.8, we hit math frac, boom, 4/5 comes out. Okay? So that will help us greatly on number 2. Because right now with number 2, if we're going to do it long way, we'd say tens, hundreds, thousands. We'd have to put 496 over 1,000 and just keep reducing, okay? So how many times does 2 go into 496? How many times does 2 go into 1,000 and so forth? And you would eventually get there, but let's just use our calculator. We're going to do 0.496 and hit math frac. And what do we get? 62 over 125. 62 over 125. And you would get there eventually, guys, because I assume everybody has a cell phone, so you can use the calculator feature on your cell phone today. And you say, okay, 496 divided by 2 is 248 over 500, right? We divide both by 2. And then you would just keep going until you got to 62, which is an even number, and 125, which is odd, and you're done there. I don't expect for any of us to be doing it this way, though. We're going to be using that math frac button. All right, number 3 is a dart made 30 bullseyes out of 100 attempted throws. What percent throws were bullseyes? This is kind of throwing you right into stats. How many, yeah, it's 30%, right? But how would you know? Well, how many total things did you attempt? 100, right? And out of those 100, how many were bullseyes? 30. So you just put 30 over 100 in your calculator, and you get 0.3. Is that okay? And that could be an answer. It's equivalent to what they want, but the key word is what percent do they want? So what do we have to do to 0.3? How do we go from a decimal to a percent? We need to do what? Multiply by 100. That made it way harder than it was, but I'm just pointing it out because if it wasn't perfectly 100, like say it was 30 out of 122, it's not automatically 30%, but you do 30 over 122, get the decimal equivalent, multiply by 100. Oopsie. So our answer, guys, after we multiply by 100, is like Devin said, that 30%. And that, guys, is straight out of like chapter 5 in stats. That's kind of like what we're going to see with probability. Like what are the odds of I'm getting a bullseye every time you throw? It'd be 30%. All right, these guys, you probably can do pretty quickly, not even using your calculator, okay? So keep in mind, how do we go from a percent to a decimal? Look at our bottom line over there. We just need to divide by 100. Or move the decimal over 2 spots to the left, okay? So the decimal's technically behind it, so we go 1, 2. What goes in front of that 9, guys? A 0. So our answer is 0.09. Some people have asked me about that 0 in front. Do you need it? No, it doesn't mean any difference, but who's going in the medical field? Was it you, Lexi, that you're going into nursing? Have you taken 114 yet? Yes. Okay. And they will murder you if you don't have a 0 in front. And I mean that like kind of lightly, but the key thing is that 0 in front lets you know that there's a decimal there. Because if somebody kind of wrote it like this, like, you're like, is that just a 9? Is it 0.09? And it could make a difference with what you're supposed to be giving, right? And so if you're supposed to give 0.09 versus 9 milligrams, you might have just overdosed on someone, okay? So that 0, that's called a leading 0, it's just helped to point out, hey, there's a decimal. We have numbers behind it, okay? I will not get mad at you. My math lab does not get mad at you. if you put 0.09, all right? What about 0.4 when we move the decimal over 2 spots to the left? What do we get? 0.004. Is that all right? What about 100%? Well, his decimal is technically behind him. So if you have a whole number and there's no decimal there, guys, you have a decimal behind it. Guys, please put away everything but your white notes right now. This is what I'm talking about. I want participation. What's your cell phone? Are you using it for your calculator? Okay, sorry. But don't work on that worksheet, David, because it's one of those things that this is a harder, more important topic. And if you're missing this, you already know how to do the tangent worksheet. You just need to put time to do it. You know what I mean? And I don't mean to be mean about it, but it's one of those things that I need your focus right here. Okay? 100%, guys, when you move it over 2 spots, what do? You get what? 1. This is important because when we're doing statistics, we're going to get decimals where it's going to be 0.78, but you need to realize the total is 1, okay? Or 100%. What about 42%? What do you get? 0.42. What about 713%, guys?
7.13.
Yep. Do you guys see what we're doing? We're just dividing by 100 or moving it over 2 spots. Keep this in mind. 100 is kind of your barrier, okay? 100 is usually the top, and it equals 1. So anytime you're over 100%, you are going to have a number that's bigger than 1. So 713%, that's 7 times bigger than 100. So our decimal is going to be 7 times bigger than 1, 7.13. Are there any questions on any of those of what we did? Okay. And again, just keep in mind it's going to always be 100 in this class. When we do other things in other math classes, sometimes you're divided by different amounts, but this will always be out of 100. All right, write the decimal as a percent. What do we got to do? Decimal to a percent, we're going to multiply by 100. So that means we're just going to move it to the right 2 spots. So what does this become? And we're going to be careful, guys, because whenever they want you to write it as a percent, what do we also need with the number? A percent sign. So that's the only time you're going to have a unit, okay? 0.9, what's that turn into? So notice when we did that, we moved it 1 spot past, so we had to put a place 0 in there. So that's 90%. 21.21 changes to 21%. What do you guys get here? 2.8, does that look right? Am I going too quickly? Or you guys are okay? You're like, no, you're going way too slow. Sorry. I just want to make sure everybody feels comfortable. And then is it 55.43? Guys, kind of keep in mind, a lot of times you're going to do the math and you're going to get this decimal answer, and they're going to say round to the nearest 100th of a percent. And you're like, oh, round to the nearest 100th. And you start rounding the decimal. But is that decimal a percent? No. So when they say round to the nearest 100th of a percent, make sure you change it into that percent first, then worry about the rounding, okay? And kind of keep that in mind. And it's something that maybe you don't catch at the beginning, but pay attention to the directions. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to write these fractions or mixed numbers as percents. So notice for a fraction, to get all the way to a percent, we have the 2 procedures. We've got to divide first to get that decimal, but then once we have that decimal, we'll just move it over 2 spots to the right or multiply by 100. So this is where, like I was saying, like Jay or whoever doesn't have do you have a cell phone? Feel free to use your cell phone for the actual division if you want for today. So what we're going to do is we have 8 divided by 15. So we get this, okay? And you're like, okay, well, how does that help me out? Well, we are in that middle mode right now. So what we did is we did 8 divided by 15. So we have a decimal now, but what do I still need to do to get to a percent? Move it over 2 spots so we can multiply by 100. Okay? So we know our answer is going to be 53 something. And since this note packet was kind of nice and gave it just multiple choice, what's our answer? D. But how do we know what to do with this 0.3 repeating? Do you guys know the rules of repeating numbers? Has anybody ever told you that? It's a line. So and this is what I would accept on your test. I would, on your homework, whatever. You would do 53.3% like that. Okay? If they want it as a decimal, or excuse me, a fraction, if a number ever repeats, like 1 digit, it's over 9. So what's 3 repeating? What's 3 over 9 reduced to? 1/3. Okay? If you see 6 repeating, what's 6 over 9 reduced to? 2/3, right? If you see 7 repeating, guess what it is? 7/9. All right, so anytime you see one number repeating over and over again, you just put it over 9. All right, so we know this is D. 48 over 25, what kind of number we're going to get? We're going to get a number greater than 1. So we know we're going to get a percent that's greater than 100%. So kind of keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our calculator today. 48 divided by 25. We get 1.92. But be careful because you kind of want to leave it like that. But we still have to do what? Multiply it by 100. So you get 192%. Is that B? Is that okay for the front page? And again, I know a lot of these skills, you're like, I get it, but it's one of those things, if I didn't go over it, I feel like I'd have a lot of questions when we got to the stats part, and you're like, how do we do this again? So that's what's great about this co-rec, is that we can just kind of hit it real quickly and get it over with, and then you can jump right into the statistics. Are there any questions on the front page? Are you guys okay? So real quickly, guys, we're going to do the same thing on 16. We want to round it to the nearest hundredth of a percent. So what does that mean? It means we need to change it to a decimal, then a percent, then worry about rounding, okay? So we're going to do 2 divided by 9, and we get 0.22 repeating, but we're only in the decimal land, right? So what do we still need to do to get it to a percent? Move it over or multiply by 100. So notice this one, guys. We have 22.2222 forever, right? And this is what I was talking about. Change it to that percent first, then worry about rounding to whatever it wants you to round to. In this case, it didn't make a difference because it's a bunch of 2s, and 2s are less than 5, so it just stays a 2, right? But if you had like a bunch of 6s, right, a 6 would bump one of the 6s up to a 7, but which 6, right? So you want to change it to that percent first. So we want to round to the nearest hundredths. We go 10th, 100th, like that. What's behind it? A 2. So what's that mean? It means keep him a 2 and drop everything else. So this is 22.22%. And like I said, it'd be different if it was like 0.6 repeating, and then we multiplied by 100 and got 66.66666. We'd have to know what spot we're looking at to know whether it's 0.67, 0.667, whatever it may be. So make sure you change it there. All right, we got like 2 minutes. We're going. Write the percent as a fraction or mixed number. It's just basically the bottom, guys, where we're going to first divide it by 100 to get a decimal, and then we're just going to hit math frac, okay? So let's do 308 divided by 100. We're going to get a number greater than 1, because that's greater than 100%, and we get 3.08, okay? This is what's interesting, because you're like, how do I write it as a mixed number? Anything in front of the decimal will be a nice whole number, okay? So we're going to write a 3 over here for sure. So this was 3.08. What we want to focus on is how do we change the 0.08 to a decimal? Well, on your calculator, you just type 0.08 and hit math frac, and it does it for you, okay? If you were doing it by hand, you would just put 8 over 100, because it's in the 100 spot, and you reduce 8 by 100, because 2 goes into it, 2 goes on into it, and you get to 2 over 25. Are there any questions there, guys? We're just following that bottom row. We changed the percent to decimal by dividing by 100, and then we hit math frac for just the decimal part, okay? Just the decimal part, because the whole number will always be a whole number, because anything greater than 1 is greater than 100%. 20%, what's that change to? 20 divided by 100, you hit that, you get 0.2, but then you hit math frac, and you get 1/5. Is that what you guys got? So 20 over 100, and then you just reduce it, or math frac, you get 1/5. And this is probably the easiest one of them all. A lot of times we get nervous about word problems, but it's not too bad. Okay, let's look at 19. It says, in a surveyed area, 57.1% of the residents signed up for the local park district pool pass. Write this percent as a decimal. So like you get scared, but all it wants you to do is take that percent that you see and write it as a decimal, aka divide by 100, right? So we're just going to do 57.1 divided by 100. Boop, boop. What do you guys get? 0.571. Okay. Sorry again for that being